Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and 2020 is almost done. This week we saw 3 new Demons welcomed into the fold at training, and in a moment, Grapeviney and I will talk with the Melbourne Football Club's National Recruiting Manager, Jason Taylor, to discuss his 8th draft, the draftees, and the recruitment process. Later, we'll be joined by Demonland podcast regulars George and Binman to wrap up the draft and season 2020. But first, Jason Taylor. Our guest tonight is the Melbourne Football Club's National Recruiting Manager, Jason Taylor, who has just completed his 8th draft for the Demons. Jason, thanks for giving up your time to join us once again on the Demonland podcast.
It's a pleasure. No worries, Andy.
JC, can you take us through the 3 picks, Jake Bowie, Bailey Laurie and Fraser Rossman from this year's draft, and what positions and roles you see them playing for the MFC?
Yeah, well, we went into this draft as the year unfolded that we thought that there was a really good variety of player and we would target a group of players. So in players that, as I've been on record stating that, we just wanted to bring in really good decision makers, really good ball users, high footy IQ, and also we wanted to bring in some run. So, on the other wing to Ed Langdon. So we feel we were able to achieve all that. So with Jake, we're actually going to start him back. He's played a little bit of footy back. He's played a fair bit of footy on the wing. He's played footy forward. But he has played a little bit of footy back where he looks really good with his run and his decision making, and he does open up the field with his foot skills. And Bailey will initially start forward, very creative player, either side of the body, very good finisher on goal, but he does have some scope down the track to go through the midfield. Just great spatial awareness, so he's just able to not only evade himself, but he'll put teammates into good spots. And with Fraser, I was able to see Fraser a couple of times over the pre-season before COVID hit, and he played a little bit forward in those practice games and also on the wing. I think he had about 13 shots at goal in those 2 games, just with his ability to run and his speed and his aerial prowess. So we just thought that he might be a player that could really develop over time with his athletic profile as that taller winger, and that's where he'll start with his training with the group.
Are any of these guys sort of ready to play round 1? And if not, do you expect to see any of them play in 2021?
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer. We don't go into any draft period really thinking that they need to play immediately. We think, the list is in a good enough spot, but that's not required. But that's up to their progress and how quickly they come on. They've only had 2 training sessions, but they've slotted in pretty well, and that remains to be seen, to be honest.
Jason, it was a pretty extraordinary year as a result of COVID. How did you and the recruiting team go about assessing the Victorian prospects, given the circumstances?
Yeah, so obviously we've seen them through 16s and their bottom age years, and also pre-season. Fortunate enough to get around to a few practice games, prior to COVID hitting, and that not only gave you a bit more of an insight into the growth of, the more established players, but it also gave you a look at players that, might come on that you earmark from that pre-season games to watch throughout the year. So we had a bit of a first look at some of those guys, and then we just had a mountain of vision to go through, and then it was about bringing in more vision from their school football and anything we could source really, and then it's just about going over that. So it was a long year really, and working through reference checks, and then we're fortunate enough to see them in a combine as well. But along with all that, the South Australian, West Australian footy got going eventually, and we were able to watch live stream of that over the weekends, which was really useful. And we just assessed as we normally would. I think we've got an experienced enough team, with myself and Kelly O'Donnell and Darren Ferrugia, who actually have been made redundant through the COVID. And, Todd Patterson did some work on the futures for us, and also Tim Lamb. So with that experience, I think that, it's not an issue to assess players when you're doing an off vision as well. I think if you're less experienced, it'd be more difficult. Obviously, a live viewing's more beneficial, but that's what we had to work with, and that's what we did. So, I went to a couple of country games mid-year when it opened up, and then it closed down pretty quickly again. So I was able to see a little bit of that footy as well.
The three draftees, they're all Victorians who obviously were unable to play, like you said, in the NAP Cup this year. Was this a strategy to pick Victorian prospects ahead of players from South Australia and WA who had exposed form?
No, not at all. We assessed everyone on their merits and put them in an order as we normally would. I introduced the boys to the playing group and the staff on Monday, and I spoke about, what you learn a little bit out of COVID. We all do, and it's about putting your best foot forward at each opportunity you have, and representing yourself well and with purpose. Each occasion you get to do that. And I spoke, about Jake Bowie, how he's always been a consistent player, and he was able to put on a really good performance at the MCG on grand final day. None of these boys not knowing that next year will be ripped off them. And same with Bailey Laurie in the final series last year. He's consistent throughout, but his final series was really, really promising. And, in Fraser's case, to see his growth from last year to this year over the pre-season was, unbelievable, really. And the only other opportunity he got to impress was through the combine, which, I think he missed the record by 1 second, and it was later smashed by Harry Sharp. But, he just the way he presented himself and the work he put in, they're the type of things that you can put your best foot forward on each occasion you get, and, you can get rewarded.
You mentioned some redundancies. How was the soft cap reduction? How is that going to affect the recruiting team sort of going forward?
Yeah, well, we've been able to maintain Kelly O'Donnell in a part-time role, but then it's basically just down to Tim Lamb, obviously, list manager, looking after that side of it, and I'll be just looking after the drafts with some support from Todd Patterson, who remains in his position, looking after the academies as far as, NGA until we don't know how long it'll run for, and then obviously father-sons, but he's obviously the AFLW list manager as well, so it'll be different. Been able to keep our South Australian manager Dave Odie and West Australian manager Devon Martin and a young fella Cameron Allen over there, but all the Victorian part-timers have had to be let go as well. So it's a different landscape. It's not unfamiliar, I suppose, when I first started. But it's been a tough year on that front, and quite sad, some of the great people that have been lost to the game in the interim.
Jason, can you just take us behind the rationale of trading picks, something that we're quite actively doing over a few seasons, and this year essentially, picking up 2 early second-round picks in what some are viewing as a compromise draft, as opposed to next year being, reportedly a very strong crop. What's the thinking behind that, and is it just a smart tactic to keep trading away the future and sorting out the present and leaving that for the next year?
Yeah, well, there's a bit of that. Although they're 2 late first-round picks, so it's regardless of academy players jumping in, and we like the variety of player. Like next year's a reasonable draft as well. Like every draft's pretty good, I reckon. But it's also a lot of midfielders next year. So we just like the variety of a group of players that we thought that if we could get 3 of those, that would be a good result for us. And like you say, next year is next year, and a lot of water goes under the bridge. And we just thought it was a good opportunity to get in, and we traded away. I know we did it the year before, but we ended up turning that into Cosy Pickett and Trent Rivers.
Yep.
And this year we've been able to bring in 2 first-rounders for one, albeit at the back end of the first round. So, yeah, it's just about getting the players in, and that group of players, as I said, that we thought could help us.
There was speculation in the lead up to the draft that had us right into Max Holmes. How serious was that interest, and was there a reaction when Geelong made the trade to bring him in and perhaps, pinching him from us?
No, not at all. I think that all gets a bit overstated as far as media and, as I said, we had a group of players. We've done our work on, an enormous amount of players, really. And we had some interest in Max at some point. It was more probably focused around that third selection. But he was in a group of players, and there was other players that we, may have had in front of Max that went before our selections as well. Do you know what I mean? So yeah. It's it certainly wasn't about that. A lot of clubs had interest in not only Max but other players. So it's just the nature of the actual system, to be honest.
Another one, perhaps in the same category, Jack Carroll, who was speculated to go in the top 20 and then slid to pick 41.
Yeah, I think that if you find doing your research, there's probably players like Jack that slide, every year.
Yeah.
And maybe they haven't slid. Maybe it's just it's been reported that, we did a lot of work on Jack. He played well on grand final day also last year and had a pretty strong Colts year. So, again, he was in a group of players that was, that was around that mark for us, but it was, it's just you have an order and you stick to it.
We have 2 remaining list spots available to us. Can you give us any scoops there? Have we asked any prospects to train with us over the pre-season?
Not as yet, no. Deacon Smith, who's a next generation academy boy, he'll train with us. They can't start training with us until post the Christmas break.
Jason, you talked before about this year's group of players being very good decision makers and providing a bit of run and skill. In a broad sense, and I know we've asked you this question before, but is drafting about taking the best available regardless of the position, or is it about identifying deficiencies and needs and picking players that fill those?
I think it's a bit of both. I think you just can't keep bringing in the same type. You are looking to, bring in players that complement your current group. And that's probably what there's, if you look at the last 2 years, being able to bring in 6 players in 32 or whatever, we've been able to, there's been a bit of best available with that. We felt Luke Jackson was best available. And then there's also been some fill some needs through those selections. So it is a little bit of both. But, I mean, you're not going to overlook a player that you think can be a genuine superstar just for needs.
What's the latest on prospective father-son prospects for the D's? I believe Kobe Farmer nominated for the draft this year but wasn't picked up. What's the latest on Kobe? And I'm sure you're keeping a close eye on Kalani White, who is almost as tall as his old man now.
Yeah, there's a few boys coming through in there, but they're still only around that 14, 15 year-old range. Tajway Woden, he'll come over and train with us as well. Sorry, but he's not until next year's draft. So that's just a common practice we would do, like with next generation academy players. Kobe's over here visiting his father at the moment, so we're in conversations just considering whether we give him that opportunity as well. But we just haven't finalised anything on that yet.
Just a couple more for you, Jason, and extremely grateful for your time. The Ben Brown trade seemed to come out of the blue for many supporters. When did the club become aware that snagging someone of Ben's talents was a possibility? And what do you make of the disparity in what he cost to our club and the cost of Jeremy Cameron given their very similar stats and profile over recent years.
Yeah, well, no, they are similar in that sense. We just saw an opportunity with Ben, like as far as we think he can straighten us up a little bit there and assist Sam and Luke. So we saw that as a good opportunity when it arose to then get involved in that. And Tim Lamb did a fantastic job in making initial contact with Ben and then going from there. But we thought, I'm not here to speak of other clubs and their deals and things like that, but it's, we thought that was a fair and reasonable deal for both parties. And, and that's how you go into the trade period, and that's the outcomes you look for.
In regards to our recruits over the past few years, we haven't had the chance to see many of them in action due to injuries. There's Aaron Nitschke, who went down last year with his second ACL injury in the pre-season. Harry Petty missed the entire year through injury, and not having a proper seconds competition last year made it difficult for Sparrow and Jordan, the latter suffering an injury on the cusp of selection. How do you see their development and tracking?
Yeah, well, obviously Tommy made some real strides last year, Tommy Sparrow, before injury. So we're really pleased with how it's done for pre-season. He's in really good condition. He's put on a lot of size. He's training very well. James and Jordan the same. Yeah, James, I mean, the year really affected those boys. What I will say about that group is that, their dedication's unbelievable, really. For young players, they set a fantastic example about consistency in their habits. And James, the same as Thomas, come back really well and he's running really well. He's put on some good size, and it's just about opportunity. I mean, you can't fit 28, 30 into 22. Yeah. That's just the reality of it. And you need good young players underneath to develop. And I think he was very close, James. He didn't put a foot wrong all year, but that set up of the competition made it difficult, and then he got injured. Unfortunately, at the wrong time. And Harry, he just had those groin issues, which was disappointing. But he's back now, and he's training, and he's training with the defenders, where he started his career, and we've got really high hopes for Harry. And Aaron, well, it's well documented that he's had the 2 knee injuries, which is just unfortunate, but he's back in training, and he's training very well. He's just a player that when you watch training and all drills, and he just finds the footy. So he'll be training, as a winger, and he can really cover the ground, and fingers crossed that he gets a run at it.
A lot of promise from the class of 2019. Plenty of exciting signs from Jackson, Cozzy, and Rivers. What's it like for you watching them play their first games and making their debut? It's probably like you must feel like a parent in some ways, watching a child go onto the field for the first time. Take us through that, if you could.
Yeah, I mean, you always. I'm not nervous on draft night. I'm more nervous when they get going, I suppose. And you watch how they progress. But I was just thrilled that. I thought they were, all 3 of them were able to really impact in what was a tricky year. So, unfortunately, when Luke hurt his hamstring, I thought that really affected us a little bit. He was really starting to improve every game. And, I think Cozzy, on all the measurements, if you like, had a really good first year for a small forward. Just probably need to be a little bit more accurate on goal, but if he had been, it would have been an outstanding year. And we all saw how Rivers finished off the year. So that was really pleasing. They all showed a competitive spirit. The way they've come back's been strong as well. Like, just looking at Luke Jackson the other day, it was unbelievable the size he's put on, and he just looks like an imposing figure, really. So got really strong hopes that they can continue their development into 2021.
You must have been really rapt with when Trent Rivers kicked that sealer late in the season.
Yeah, I was pleased that I thought in a few of those latter games that he showed a real competitive spirit to want to win. And, you know, the more we've got doing that, the better off we're going to be. And that was the most pleasing aspect of that.
Jason, we want to thank you once again for your time. It's always great chatting with you post-draft and just getting a little bit of insight into sort of what goes into picking these stars of the future for the D. So thank you very much for your time once again.
Yeah, no worries, Andy. Jason, cheers.
Thank you. That was Jason Taylor, and always great, as I said, to speak with Jason post-draft. It really is a fantastic insight, and thank you to the Melbourne Football Club for providing us with Jason. Joining us tonight, long-time Demon Lander, George. Good evening, George. How are you?
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Binman, when he comes on, and good evening to our listeners. And for those listeners, even 20 minutes into this podcast, it's been more entertaining and insightful than the whole of the AFL draft night, when they can only manage 45 selections in the same time as it takes to play a game of footy.
That was very hard watching. We know there was COVID and they couldn't all be in the same room, but I doubt even if everyone was in the same room, they would have dragged everything on like they did. It was just excruciating at times, and I'm sure they made every team had 5 minutes to prepare, but I'm sure that they were told you have to take that entire 5 minutes, and it was very hard to watch. Joining us also, Binman. Good evening, Binman. How are you?
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. That was a terrific interview. The draft I actually found it's a bit like watching Test cricket, although I love Test cricket. I guess I started off listening to it on SEN for my pain, and I think it was Matt Rendell. And he was quite interesting. But the way they had it was just so amateur hour, and like they were trying to fill 5 minutes. But he was actually quite interesting to listen to, not dissimilar. I mean, he comes from a recruiting background, doesn't he? So, and he's a bit of a gun. But then I watched a little bit of the AFL and ended up watching a bit of the Fox. And I actually watched more of this draft night because I had it on in the background than I probably ever watched. So, yeah, it was better than trade radio, put it that way.
Fair enough. I'm not sure where Grapeviney, he's having some internet problems, so he may join us a bit later on, but we'll move on. What did you think? I'll start with you, George. Were you surprised by any of our picks? We seem to have, with our first two picks, we've gone very small. We've gone for that small, quick type forward, half forward. I'm not sure whether they're going to be midfielders. Jason Taylor sort of indicated that Jake would perhaps play off the half back line. Were you surprised with our selections?
Not really, Andy. I think it was all just the final piece in the strategy that the club's taken into the draft and trade period this year. Firstly, through the draft period, was get the deals that will provide you with the picks done early. Bruce and Hannon were moved out pretty quickly, all settled, done and out of the way. Then we finally got Ben Brown over the line. That enabled us to be able to massage those picks and mix them up with future picks to be able to get those picks necessary to get the players that perhaps we had a greater need for. And I think that was the ultimate message, is that we drafted for the needs. It was pretty obvious, I think, to most supporters that we needed further support for Cozzy Pickett up forward, and we've still got a gap in the wing area to support Langdon on the other side. And I think that's probably where we finished up with these types of players. The sad part about watching all the video highlights of players running around is that they don't show the defensive side of what players are capable of doing. It shows them running with the ball and kicking and passing and all. I don't think I've ever seen a bad pass on any of the video highlights. But I think we've got some good players who will probably fill our needs. We just have to wait and see what will happen. Yeah, not unsurprising what we finished up with, given our relatively lowly position available to us in this draft.
B-Man, your thoughts on our pickups?
I think I was wrapped actually, and I think it was a really, really good interview, by the way. And if you're out there, Greg Viney, top job as well. I thought it was really interesting. He said a couple of times, Jason, that about high footy IQ and skills, and using the ball well. I think that's such an evident gap for us, or a need that I wonder whether he's been trying to fill that for a while. So I think that's the question that Grapevine asked about: do you pick best available or needs? Sort of, it's probably a nice coming together of factors when the best available fits your needs. And so I was thrilled that they seemed to target players with good kicking skills, because I think, it's, as I talked about last during the season, it's never been more important to have players who don't turn the ball over. And who did he say would be playing from the back line?
I believe it was Jake Bowie.
Yeah, right. Because I was said on Demonland, I wrote on Demonland that for us, that's a real gap, is that Caleb Daniels, who he's been compared to a bit, that role of playing between the arcs. If you think about it, Caleb Daniels, he's a halfback flanker, but he plays a lot up the ground, the way Salem was in the sort of second half of this season, the last season, and the sort of connector between the arcs, as Goody likes to say, in that transition forward. He doesn't miss targets. Often those 30, 40 metre kicks that link in the chain, takes the kick into the corridor or the bailout safe. So we really need that. We've got Salem, I guess, who can play that, but we definitely need another player, maybe off the other halfback flank with Salem. So, yeah, I think it's fantastic. And Rosman looks like he's got a bit of X factor about him. And I think Jason Taylor likes to take those players, the speculative picks that are, that might have something in them that isn't sort of immediately evident.
I imagine it would have been very difficult for the recruiters, given that they didn't get to see, pretty much didn't see anything of these guys this year. So, usually some of these guys, like the guys we picked, were they only saw them as 17-year-olds. So there's sometimes a lot of growth from players who sort of take the next step up, and then there are players that might sort of not come on as strong in their 18-year-old year. So, yeah, let's hope we've got it right with these guys.
Just on that, Andy, I thought it was interesting that Jason said that him and the team watched a bit of live stream from Western Australia, and I think also the South Australia. I presume that's the main vision they saw during the season, because I guess they were playing junior footy, yet still picked up 3 Victorian boys. So just goes to show, I guess. And last year, after was it all 3 of our picks last year were interstate players? So
that's correct.
Yeah,
I think critically as well, we didn't pick anyone who excelled in the South Australian Grand Finals, given our bad history in those areas.
The Tompers Cups or the
yes.
All right, we'll move things along. Did you guys watch the members' information night the other night?
Yeah, I watched it. Yep.
But George,
definitely. Always interested in those sort of things.
Yeah, so the members' information night we had the other night. I thought it was quite interesting. I'll talk about. We had Gary Pert on, sort of talking about the review that was conducted about the club. I don't think they sort of said a lot, but without sort of giving away information. But one of the things they kept bringing up was this psychological resilience that needs to be worked on. We've noticed, Blind Freddie has noticed that from week to week, from quarter to quarter, week to week, we can go from, champions to wooden spooners in the space of a quarter or a week, and we've sort of got to do something about that mental resilience. But nothing was really sort of. They highlighted a lot of our deficiencies, but there was sort of not much of. I don't know. To me, I didn't find there was any information of what we're going to do to sort of fix any of that stuff. Not Grapevine. George, would you take out of the review?
Yeah, I think a lot of people might forget, and there was a lot of criticism, particularly on Demonland, about before the review took place, about the need to look really solidly at what was required to get us to that next stage that we're all hopeful. And if you look at where we've finished up with, given the problematic financial situations that all clubs are now in terms of coaching staff and support staff and medical staff even, and the limitations that have been imposed by the AFL. We've brought in last year Richardson. This year we've brought in Williams. They've completely reshuffled, brought in Uze as well. They've reshuffled the roles extensively with the players, and I suspect the same sort of things happening in those areas, like the psychological areas, where you need to really concentrate now on using your resources to the best advantage. So people who thought that nothing much will get done, or Perth will take a backward step and it'll be the same old story and the same old crew. When you look at the end results, I think this is a really dramatic difference in the support services around Simon Goodwin, and perhaps off the field as well. It's disappointing when we heard in that interview with Jason Taylor the cuts that occurred in the recruiting areas, but with these AFL imposed limitations, there's not much we can do about it, and that's happening across all the staff, the admin staff, and like I said, it's been happening at other clubs extensively as well.
They mentioned he mentioned that Alan Richardson is now in charge of the AFL men's program and installing of new assistants. We targeted Uze because he's been acknowledged as one of the best assistants in the AFL. Stafford, they acknowledged him as having a huge hand in making Max the best ruckman in the league. And now Stafford's going to have a more broader assistant role. He's working with the forward line. I'm just a couple of the notes that I had from that. He mentioned that skill execution against top teams needs to be worked on. And in that Williams coming to the club, and we'll talk about Chocko Williams in a moment, will be a great teacher. But one of the things that I'm excited about, and then having seen vision of, is the elite training facility that we've got down at Casey. They mentioned that the pre-season will be done exclusively at Casey on the MCG size ground, and that's going to make a huge difference. They've got one of those, they've built an indoor kicking facility that every other club seems to have, and that's going to be used all year round, regardless of the weather. I guess the fact that we're training out at Casey is not good news for people like yourself, George, who likes to go down to training, as we discussed before the show. I like to come down to training, but it seems like training's going to be a bit of a lockout this year. But I am excited about this Casey facility.
Yeah, the other thing was Jordan Lewis was touted as turning up in February, March as on a part-time basis as well. We all know Jordan's greatest skill was his kicking ability, particularly under pressure. So hopefully, utilising his capabilities will be helpful as well to the players.
Big man, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just on the information night in general. I mean, obviously it's a bit of an unusual situation, the Zooming, although we've all got used to it a bit. So that was moving my volume. But I thought there was a bit of a weird energy with it. And like you mentioned, the review, the discussion, Pert was talking a bit about the fact that it was about the football. This was the focus was going to be on the football, but a third of the information that was discussed were really things that were probably in the financial space, like the ground, even the Casey stuff. He talked about how important the indoor space was, and but there was obviously at the top there was a fair bit of conversation about the the ground, what we might be doing with that, the social club around the MCG, with no real new information, and certainly nothing that any fan would go away thinking, well, great, we've started the journey on that. Like, really nothing from, which is not that surprising, I guess. But it was sort of funny to take up so much time to tell us so little on something that he was at pains to say initially, that the night was about football. So I thought it was a bit sort of, as you say, there wasn't really much dialogue about what to change, but it felt a little bit for me in that review that my sense is sort of Perk putting his stamp on things is how it felt for me, and some quite curious sort of, as he said, Chocko Williams coming in, Richardson staying and moving into another role. And I know we'll talk about it in a second. And I thought the other very curious thing was the complete lack of discussion about or thanks to Mahoney. So Mahoney.
Well, I was going to bring that up as well. I thought that was extremely strange. I'm not sure what happened with that, and I'm sure anyone listening to this podcast is aware that Josh Mahoney has taken up a role at Essendon. He's no longer with us. For them not to, do you think it was an oversight of them not mentioning him at all? I can't imagine it was an oversight. I don't know if there was any bad blood. I don't know if this sort of came out of the blue. Can any of you offer any insight into what might have happened there? Because I thought it was one, strange that they didn't mention him or thank him for his 13 years, I believe, at the club. Bimman, can you offer any insight there?
If it's an oversight, it's a poor oversight, unless it's conscious. And given the fact they had a list of people they did thank, it would seem a double oversight then, wouldn't it? Which doesn't make it very likely that it seems more likely than not that they consciously decided not to thank him. Who knows what that indicates? I mean, maybe the sort of timing of it directly after the draft, but look, I mean, for me, discussion about those off-field roles, I never feel I have enough information to bring anything to the table, particularly other than just feedback from what you hear around the traps. But 13 years is a long time at a footy club in multiple different roles, and that's a tough 13-year stretch at any football club. For being at the D's during that, you get less time for serious manslaughter than 13 years at Melbourne Footy Club in the last decade and a bit. So, yeah, it was definitely curious, I thought. And I don't know, to me, it seems a bit bad form either way. You either forgot it's bad form not to at least acknowledge him. Maybe you don't have to thank him and leave people to read between the lines, but not to at least acknowledge his contribution seemed a bit bad form to me.
Grapevine, have you rejoined us here? I see you are there.
I have. You would have thought you'd get pretty good internet service when you're living 5 kilometres from the centre of town in Australia at the end of 2020, but alas.
It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. Can you offer us any insight into perhaps the non-mention of Josh Mahoney and his contribution?
No, I only to agree with Bin Man's comments that it was strange. I just wonder whether the timing of it all was a factor, but I suppose you've also got to ask the question, presumably the club were aware that he'd thrown his hat in the ring for the Essendon job, so yeah, I sort of find it hard to believe that it was sprung upon them at the last minute, but a curious one because, as many would say, he certainly deserved a thank you and a goodbye.
So they talked about, he talked quite a bit about, well, the home base, but it really was nothing new. He said that he comes every day to work, and that's what they talk about. That's all he does all day. But there is no new information about that. But I guess, I mean, given the COVID situation, I don't know what's sort of happening, and there's financial concerns. One person brought up in the Q&A part of it is, why are other clubs getting all this money to develop their training facilities, and we're not getting anything for this. And I think that was answered well, that they're getting money for things that they currently have, and this isn't the search for the home base isn't something we already have in our hot little hands. So we're not getting any money to develop something that we don't have. But on the flip side, I hope that the government is assisting us in being able to secure a facility that's close to the G. But George, where do you think this base is going to be?
I think from all the noises coming from Glen Bartlett and Perth is that it will be in and or around Gosh's Amy Park. There doesn't seem to be any discussion about beyond that, and quite frankly, I don't think anybody has come up with a football-sized oval piece of ground that's within range of the MCG, other than those two options, or that option on its own. I think
particularly because the MCG size ground is the main, the main point that they want to get. They made a big deal of that's why we're going to be training at Casey.
And I think that's the difficulty with their situation. At the last AGM, they came out and said they were plans were well developed. We've heard that for the last 30 years, and obviously nothing's happened this year. And while there's good reasons for nothing further having happened, I think it's really telling that, as one of the people who asked the questions, why are the others getting all this money? It's actually putting us further and further behind. Not only haven't we got a prime training facility, but these other clubs who've got a prime training facility are now topping up and improving their facilities, and we haven't even got to first base. So it's really telling. You hear the news in the last couple of days that Melbourne City Soccer Club have moved to Casey, where they'll have 4 floodlit soccer grounds available to them, and I think Casey Council's thrown in $23 million, if I'm correct. That shows you the size of what we require to even catch up to the very basics of what the other clubs have currently got. So I really pray that something gets done pretty soon about this, because, like I said, we're falling further and further behind when everybody else is moving on. Hawthorn's got somewhere between an $80 and $120 million facility program for Dingley. I think Adelaide have got a new facility at West Lakes of a similar sort of monetary value. It just goes on, and we've got nothing. So I think Bartlett and Perth had to come out and say, look, yes, we recognise that nothing has happened because of COVID, but we're still trying. I think they've put their jobs on the line in the future from that perspective, because, like I said, certainly I've been hearing this story for the last 30 years.
I was going to say that it's interesting, the psychology of COVID's my perspective at least, and I wonder if it's changed some of the players on the sort of idea of Casey. It seems, for me, it's a long way away. I'm over the other side of town, but there was always this thing. It's got to, you've got to train in at Gosh's. That's where we are. But I wonder with, as you say, Andy, it looks fantastic. The footage of Casey, the ground looks immaculate. Pert was banging on about the indoor spot, which I guess is a big barn to kick a footy in. And I know they've got a new gym there and all of that sort of equipment. So that does sound like it's pretty close to the sort of standard AFL level. Maybe now with COVID and having a whole season up in Queensland, they won't mind driving down in their $50,000 car for an hour to train, rather than at Gosh's paddock, because Gosh's paddock is obviously central, but it's pretty problematic in terms of it's not even got a toilet there. So,
well, there's one toilet, but it's been there for 120 years.
How does the club look as for prospective recruits and players coming across and draft picks and that? If you've got one ground that doesn't have a toilet and another one that's a 50-minute drive from town, basically, no one wants to be doing that every day.
And it's more than a 50-minute drive. I don't think I would. I certainly wouldn't like it. I mean, I'm not saying I do anything to play AFL footy. I'm and my age isn't on my side, but so I drive anywhere. But
Maybe that's
yeah,
why they're getting all their Sandringham players in the team, because from there it's only probably a 25-minute drive.
so we also had Tim Lamb, the list manager. He spoke just about sort of our trading and our draft position, sort of gave a rundown of why we did what we did and sort of the order we did it. We wanted to get Ben Brown in as tall support for Sam Wiedemann and Luke Jackson, and we all think that's going to be a great idea. He talked about the Proust trade and the Hannon trade, and trying to obtain the best possible outcome for the club. They wanted to enhance our draft position, given that we had given away our first draft pick. As part of the Cozzy trade. But in order to do that this year, we've had to give away next year's thing, and we spoke to Jason Taylor sort of about that. And we sort of, it seems that we achieved all of our aims. He highlighted what the draft position was before all the trade period and what it was afterwards, and we had moved up the order. And then giving that summary, that over the past 2 years we've had 6 top 30 picks, and included in those 6 are 4 first rounders. So, and in addition, we've been able to sort of add sort of experienced players to fill particular needs in Langdon, Tomlinson, and Brown. So that was sort of a nice sort of wrap up from a list perspective. Grapeviney, are you happy with the way we've been trading over the past few years?
Yes, I like the idea of always trading out next year's first rounder and then dealing with that next year on the never never. That's sort of good debt as far as I'm concerned. So thumbs up. Of course, Josh Mahoney's been the man behind all that in recent years. So it'll be interesting to see if that remains the tactic going forward without him.
Anything you boys, the other big man, you want to add to our trading strategies?
It was curious. They mentioned the mathematician. I sort of pictured a boy genius hunkered over his computer, working out all of the future picks and draft picks and points, and maybe he's replacing Josh. So yeah, it's all a bit too complex for me. So that forward thing, but I like the concept, Grapeviney, of trading forward. Why not? Like we're in our window. We like next year. What's that about? Let's get.
Yeah, exactly.
The one thing from the night that I found, I mean, as I said, there was not as much football talk that Pert suggested. Like there was even presumably they chose who they were going to take questions from.
100%. They had the answers almost prepared.
So they said, Pert at once said, this is really, that's a question for the AGM because this is about football. And one of the pre-prepared questions was about how much money was raised in the and in whatever the name of the fundraising thing was, which he then went into some detail with the answer. So I thought that was kind of weird. But for me, the most interesting part of the session was Burgess's reaction to, I think there was a question, it might have even been that question actually about the fundraiser, that he came back to a question that a previous person had asked about Cairns and what had happened up there. And I thought his body language and his tone was really interesting about pushing back on the suggestion that they erred in going up on the day and making it pretty clear that it wasn't their call and that they weren't happy about it, and that the other club had 3 days preparation. For me, that was the most interesting part of the night. And hope Pert, with all these he seems like a bit of an alpha dog. I hope he was sort of in the office of Gill, or at least zooming in there and letting his displeasure known.
Well, I think we suspected that at the time. If we might have even known it at the time that it was out of our hands, that the AFL had booked the flights, and because of COVID, we sort of didn't have a choice. I think, who do we play first? The Swans. they were up there already because they were actually hubbing, if I'm not mistaken, in Cairns, and we were just to fly in, fly out. Did we stay there?
We'd been in Adelaide.
Yeah.
Adelaide.
We beat in Cairns. They came up from Adelaide, so I think we came in. Yeah, sorry, not Cairns. We played in Alice Springs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
And Andy, didn't you have some other further insight on what happened exactly on that day?
Oh yeah, I did. I'd heard from Max that they not so we flew from, I think, the Gold Coast. So we weren't on the Gold
Brisbane.
Coast. But we were in Maroochydore. Yeah, so we went from I had to take the bus to Maroochydore, from Maroochydore to Brisbane, board the plane, were on the tarmac, I think, for an hour. Look, I can't remember the exact time, but we were on the tarmac for a long time. Something had happened. We flew in. We were already running late. I don't think they even had time to put their bags or to go to the hotel and drop off their bags. They had to go straight to the ground, and they were already late, and then play the game and all that. So, and what's the bus trip from Maroochydore to Brisbane? It's
2 hours, I think.
Hour and a half, 2 hours. Yep.
Yeah.
So you add up all that time that it took to get there, and then
Brisbane, Cairns is another 3 hours, I think, in the plane.
Yeah, and then it's torrential rain up there. Completely, it was there was a sort of a duck and dive around Bruce, because the question was in relation to Bruce. I think someone had asked, well, you played Bruce in those conditions, and I thought Richardson answered that question pretty well about the fact they missed Jackson and they liked the structure, basically saying Wiedemann needed that structure of another big was the implication. But yeah, I like the way I like Burgess's response, and there's that debate about. I just think that's not an excuse. That's a reasonable thing to raise, and of course we didn't come up for the game, and who knows what's behind that, and the resilience stuff and all of that. But nonetheless, we got shafted, and I think that we hopefully will get something coming back our way this next season in the draw. But I wouldn't hold my breath for it.
Goody was one of the points that he made was to say, we're not making excuses for the Cairns schmozzle, I think he referred to it as, but here are some reasons, and that sort of the travel to Cairns was brought up, not in as much detail as I might have just provided now with what happened, but yeah. Ben Brown, they had a Q&A, and I'm really impressed with Ben Brown. I like how he presents himself. I think he'll be quite a good leader and sort of spokesperson for the club. Really wrapped with him. Said that he's currently in Tassie, and he mentioned that he'll be right to go once he returns in January, that his knee's right to go. So let's hope. He said it's feeling good. Thoughts on that, Grapeviney?
I got a letter in the post box the other week that had Ben Brown's name on it, and I was quite tempted to open and just see what kind of correspondence a full forward does receive, but I respected his privacy and left it at that. I'm like you. I'm very excited. He's an experienced player. He'll be able to offer leadership in the forward line, and to Wiedemann and Jackson in particular. And if he's over his injuries, then there's no reason why he can't get back to his very best form and kick a bag of goals.
Well, he mentioned that he feels like he has the level of footy still in him to kick 60 goals a year again. I don't know if the game is going to allow for 60 goals to be kicked again, as much as the AFL would like lots of goals being kicked. But we need goals, and we need sort of to have a guy there that's going to sort of assist the games of Wiedemann and Luke Jackson, because Wiedemann, we've seen sort of what's happened when he's all alone and gets double, triple teamed. That's not going to happen with Ben Brown in the team, and definitely not going to happen. How do you think it's? we might have talked about this in the last podcast. How do you think it's going to work, our forward line this year? Do you think we're going to play the three in there? George, I might throw that to you first.
That's the $64 question, isn't it? I think Brown's an absolute Monty. It's assuming that he's fit and but he's certainly capable. I think it's easy to overlook Brown's history and statistics at AFL level because he's been playing at North Melbourne and most people don't notice it. But the guy's been in the system for 7 years, and apart from his first and last seasons, he's played in the middle there. He played 120 games consecutively. 3 times he's kicked over 60 goals. He's been twice runner-up in the Coleman and once third in the Coleman. So if Ben Brown alone was playing with us this year, we would have played finals and probably would have finished up in top 4. I think that's how critical he is to the well-being of the side. It's going to be interesting to see how the rest of the forward line fits in. Jackson, I think, I'm not sure that Jackson's totally a forward. I think he's got that capability of being a tall midfield ruckman who moves forward. He's just so athletic, you could put him almost anywhere. Wiedemann, sadly, I'm not sold on. He's got a long way to go. He's been in the system 5 years. This is his 6th this season. So for me, the jury's still out on him. So, but I think the important thing is Brown in there will straighten us up in a big way, and also give the opportunity that the small forwards that we have and potentially we will have will be able to capitalise on that. Richmond have shown it dramatically in their premiership years. You put a Lynch in there with a Rewalt playing alongside him. It not only straightens them up, but their small forwards then become really, really dangerous. So hopefully the addition of Brown will just strengthen us all round in multiple ways, other than him just kicking goals.
We also had Goody speaking and Max, and sort of we heard the same things we hear out of the two of them. So I don't think we need to go into too much there. The other thing, Burgess spoke. I love this guy. I really hope we can keep him. I know there's been speculation that he might be gone. He might not gone, as in we'll get rid of him, but he might leave at the end of next year. But I'm rapt that we've still got him, and hopefully we can learn as much from him. Talked about the challenges of being in the hub, a challenge for all of the staff. I thought it was interesting that they sort of had to make some quick calls to get, some medical professionals at very short notice to get them into the hub. They mentioned that the COVID break, sort of took away all the advantage that we had gained from a pre-season under Burgess. So this year, let's hope we can get that advantage back with a second pre-season under him. You just mentioned a couple of new additions in terms of the high performance staff. And he rated and I don't know if that's just him rating his current team, but he rated the high performance team as good as any high performance team he's ever worked with, and then mentioned that this year's off season is going to be brutal. I like to hear that.
Just a couple of thoughts.
And before you go on, just the last thing that we hear, I think we hear way too much in football, is that the players have come back in fantastic condition, but it is good to hear.
Just a couple of thoughts from Burgess as well. He mentioned just 2 surgeries. I think maybe Oliver's shoulder, but he would be good to go. But I'd forgotten Gus that injury because it was late in the season. He's not back running till February,
yes,
which does not augur well for a player who's pretty slow already, or just, not really so much that, but just that's a big interruption, isn't it? So he's going to be a big miss, but it might give Sparrow a good chance to cement his spot in that midfield, I wonder. The other thing that you mentioned, Jason Taylor touched on it too, is that difficulty of some of the players dealing with COVID. And I thought that was really a revealing comment from Jason Taylor about how those young fellas, about the question about how they were going, Nietzsche and Jordan, and I think it was Sparrow, wasn't it, as well, about they struggled a bit. And I think it was that was struggled with a lot of things, I suspect. And it just was a good, and as you say, Burgess touched on it, it's just a good reminder of what a difficult year it must have been for a bunch of young blokes in all that sort of circumstance. And the other thought was that not just the COVID break taking that advantage away, I think the 16 minutes really took away a lot of that fitness edge as well.
Well, he did before you go on. He did mention that the 20-minute quarters are back, but we've got the 75 down to 75 rotations. So there's the advantage if we can get our players in good nick.
Does Clayton Oliver have shoulder surgery every year?
I believe
he has so far.
I believe so. So he did mention that he is back training now, but won't have contact until sometime in January. And then, as you mentioned, Gus won't be training until February. But it's good to know that there's only those 2 off-season surgeries. I think there were a few minor ones, but it's not going to have any impact or any interruptions to anyone's pre-season. So that's another tick. That's much better than a few seasons ago when we had half the team in the doctor's office. I think that's sort of it from the night, unless anyone's got any. The only other thing was that Purdy mentioned that we will be making a loss, which is no surprise, but due to some other factors, including the proud to belong, proud to give. And some other sponsorship things. There's not going to be an 8, and I assume he means 8 million in front of it. And it seems like we'll have about a 2 million or so loss. So not as devastating as they thought it might have been.
The only other thing from the night was there was a really brief, and I can't remember who said it, discussion about Tom McDonald. I think it might have been the first question.
That's in it.
Yep. And we talked about it the last podcast, but it's such a curious situation. I mean, we're talking about Ben Brown pushing for a Coleman. I mean, as we talked about a few weeks back, so did Tom McDonald in 2018, and they indicated he was going to be playing back. By all accounts on Demonland, he's lost sort of some weight. I just think it's a really fascinating. There's no plan for him to be in the forward line by the sound of it.
Goody did say, or I think it was Goody or whoever was talking about it, said, did they mention that he'd lost 5 kilos?
I think I read that on Demonland, but
yeah, I wrote that, but when I was writing it, but I think it was 5. But he did mention he'd play initially as a forward, but not to rule out a positional change. So I guess if we could get some track watchers down to training, we'd see who he's training with. But I think he's got to get back into the team first.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Like the discussion that we had about the forward setup, regardless of the combination that they end up going with, I just hope it gets resolved early on. I don't want to get to the midway point of the season. We spent the first half of the year playing mix and match and looking for the best mix. So hopefully that gets better down sooner.
Yeah,
but
it's such a this.
Go ahead, man.
Sorry, Andy. That was that issue of chopping and changing. For me, that was one of the biggest disappointments of the season. Is beginning with the small forward line, moving and changing the back line, moving and changing I just thought it was. Yeah, exactly right. We've got to have it stable, the same sort of system locked in place. It's almost as if they had decided at some point, well, we're going to experiment this season and we'll go with it rather than, controlling the things they could control and giving the players some sort of consistency of structure.
I mean, not that you want injuries, but you only want to be making changes to your setup if there are injuries. And, you want to get it locked in early on. I think it was interesting when we were talking about the forward setup. None of us mentioned Tom McDonald at all. So that says something. Oh, you did? Okay.
Isn't that the good thing about what we're talking about, in the sense that we've all of a sudden, compared to 2019 in particular, we've got options pretty well at every position throughout the field now. That Tom McDonald can play forward, can play back, that you can slot in. Even some of the new draftees can play on the wing, some can play forward. We're not going to be in the position where we're going to be desperate, I don't think, for trying to find a suitable player to fit into a spot. There's basically there's going to be competition for spots throughout the whole ground, and I think this is ultimately drives down to the strategies that the club's done around the trading and drafting. Is that we're in the premiership window now, despite what some reports in the paper might have said. When we've got people like Viney, who's 26, 27 at the moment, the players are in that prime role of 50 to 100 games. You've got a good number of these experienced players on the field. Now's the time that we've got to actually try to get that premiership door well and truly open. We can't afford to be trying to spend a lot of time developing young players anymore. We've got to take the opportunities now, and the addition of someone like Ben Brown and in the past Langdon and Tomlinson, they're the players who can get us over that next hurdle that we need to make. So very hopeful for this year. I don't know whether we'll get a premiership. You have to be very lucky to be able to get one at the end of the day, but I think we're putting ourselves in the right position.
Interesting to hear Jason Taylor say that Harrison Petty will be training with the backs rather than the forwards.
I thought so too, Great Front. And for me, when I was trying to think about who's out of that side that's potentially an A-grader, really he's the only one that comes to mind. I don't know what his ceiling is, but he's clever. He's got good hands. It probably doesn't bode well for Tom McDonald because Petty's ahead of him, I suspect, down back. So I think that was quite interesting. He was pretty quick to say it as well. And you've got Petty. I think Petty taking Tomlinson's spot down there, Petty, May and Lever. That's pretty solid big three down there. And who knows, maybe they'll play six bigs up forward.
Well,
watch this space.
We just drafted a whole lot of smalls as well, so that'll be interesting. The Mark Chocko Williams appointment that sort of came out of the blue. I might ask you, George, because you sort of know these things. What's his role, and what's Alan Richardson's role? How is that all working, and how do you think it will work together in tandem?
I don't know that I'm an expert on these areas whatsoever. Quite honestly, to this date, I don't quite know what Alan Richardson's role is. He's now supposedly the head of AFL performance, but what he was doing exactly last year is unknown to me. So, if any of the other listeners or people on this program can tell us, please do so. I think Chocko Williams seems to have a history. Not post-Port Adelaide. I think he went to Werribee and then to Richmond, where he seems to be highly regarded in terms of player development. Certainly since we lost Brendan McCartney, I don't know that there's been the sufficient emphasis on it. Matthew Egan was doing it last year, but again, you really can't judge what was going on into 2020 with COVID situation. But I think Williams has a dedicated development role. From reports from various people who've been associated with clubs with him, he's a stern taskmaster, and maybe that's what's needed. But his emphasis seems to be on getting people's kicking skills up to the required level. And quite honestly, the evidence that the change in Richmond, in particular, with some of their players under his tutelage has been dramatic. So if he can do the same thing for us, that'd be fantastic.
In corporate speak, he's got plenty of opportunity for improvement at the Melbourne Footy Club in that space.
Well, it was noted the other day some of the pictures from training with the balls that he's been responding. I'm not sure if he came up with the idea or if he's just the face of it or if it's a partnership with him and sharing footies, but it's those footies with the lines on them and supposedly to help your kicking skills. But then while I was sort of posting about that, I remembered that I sort of had a flashback from last year of posting the exact same thing. And it seems I went back and I found the post from last year, sort of copying and pasting from the Sharon website. And yes, we were using them last year. So I'm not sure if they helped us at all, but they are back. But as I mentioned on the training thread, let's hope having the boss down there, he can show them exactly how to use those footies.
It's interesting that in that time between Port Adelaide and Richmond, when he was at Werribee, he was also spent a couple of years at the Ajax Football Club in the amateurs. And I think the interesting bit of that is that Ajax are not A grade, and not an A grade club. I don't know, were they in
They're in
C?
I think now.
In B now. So yeah, it's sort of pretty unusual for someone so high profile to go back to a smaller club like that when they don't have, some sort of grassroots connection or history there. So I think that just demonstrates his real passion for the game, doesn't it? And I guess, it'll be interesting to see the various roles, but I'm hoping that he can sort of have a Brendan McCartney type influence on the players that.
Yeah, it's a curious one because you hear about his difficult to manage. Who knows what that is? Strikes me as a sort of a pert call again, like making a call around. And my first thought was, how will he and Goody work together? But I see his role similar, Grapevine, in terms of the role that McCartney played. As much as anything, I think in terms of player relationships, someone like, if you think about Oliver, he never thanked any of the coaching stuff. It was always Brendan McCartney or someone peripheral or not central. And I wonder whether he might, Chocko Williams might play that role of maybe sort of bringing people together a bit and a bit of a mediator between the different groups of blokes. So, yeah, it's an interesting one.
We found out today the new numbers for the new recruits. I believe Jake Bowie is number 17, Bailey Laurie is 16, and Fraser Rosman is 19. And I was just trying to think, who did they take over? 16 was Collar Jasny. Who 17 was Frost, but did anyone have it in between Frost? Did anyone have 17 last year? No. So that's Frosty's old number, and Hannon was 19, I believe. So they didn't retire that number after that goal in the elimination final. It's terrible.
I like to think Ray Biffin was number 19. Was Ray Biffin number 19 for the D's?
That's before my time, unfortunately.
B-Man, you I believe you wanted to discuss some nicknames. Did you have any in mind?
Well, no, but there's been some talk about Ziggy Bowie, but it's the wrong pronunciation.
Wrong spelling, you mean? Or Bowie.
Bowie, not so. It's like, he's got a pretty red head. So, no, but I think that they all need some nicknames that'll stick through their career. I'm sure their teammates will land on something. But Fraser Rosman's name sort of is quite, I guess, a bit hoi polloi with Fraser being a first name. So maybe something for him.
He looks a lot like, or a little bit like Earl
He
Spalding.
does actually, the Duke.
So, someone put up a picture in comparison, and more than a passing.
Oh, that's not a bad nickname. You wouldn't mind the Duke, would you?
I don't think anyone currently at the club in terms of the players wouldn't get the reference.
No.
So, yeah.
Mind you, win for the D's pointed out that for Fraser Rosmond, he was very excited because we'd recruited an 18-year-old Jewish carpenter. So there's a lot of upside there.
Well, I think it's. I just lost it. Sorry, guys. All right, so
they all spoke pretty well, I thought, because they spoke on the night, didn't they?
Yes, yeah. I did have.
He was a pretty confident young fella. He's the Duke. So
he was quite confident. He and I wouldn't call it an arrogance. He was like, I really want to do the best I can, and he's going to work his ass off. So yeah, I liked it. I liked, and let's hope he can back it up.
Let's hope his football's as good as his running ability. His sub 6 minute 2 kilometre time trial. I think he ran a 5:52 at the combine, which at the time set a new record, but was subsequently beaten. But he's fast. He's apparently before he took up football seriously, he was a 400 and 800 metre runner. So he might be exactly what we need on the other wing for Langdon.
And they took him pretty high, like pick 32. Like in some of the other draft boards, he wasn't up sort of that high in terms of listings. But sort of it goes a bit to what I was saying about Jason Taylor. Likes those speculative picks, I think.
What I just to back up what I said before about it's not an arrogance, but it's a sort of a confidence. He mentioned that if he doesn't beat them 1-on-1 in the marking area, he'll beat them with his endurance and speed. And I just like the way he sort of said that. It's good. It's sort of good for a player to sort of. And it's not about having tickets on yourself, because I don't think it was that, but it's good to have a bit of confidence in yourself, and yep, I like it. I was going to mention what I was going to say before was I think they do we like to draft these redheads, and let's just hope there's lots of sunscreen available during pre-season training, because Clary's been hogging it. All right, boys, anything else before we wrap things up?
Nothing from me.
Nothing? All right, boys. I think we're going to leave it there. I think we covered a lot of ground, and just want to thank George, Binman, Great Viney. It's been a fantastic year. Would have been even better had we made finals. Let's hope next year we can get deep into September. We went deep into September this year, but for other reasons. But looking forward to catching up with you guys in the new year when we can talk about some JLT games. So we'll be back. Demonland will be back February. And well done. Thanks, guys.